When Karen spotted my brand new shed, she didn't just complain, she called the sheriff. I thought that was the worst of it, until I got served with a lawsuit. But what Karen didn't know: my brother doesn't just practice law, he writes it. Hey everyone, I'm your host, and today's story is wild. It's got drama, courtroom battles, revenge, and one very angry neighbor named Karen. Before we jump in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these HOA tales travel. It all started on a warm Saturday morning. The kind where birds chirp a little louder, and you actually enjoy the hum of a lawnmower in the distance. I was outside putting the finishing touches on a modest wooden shed I'd built at the back of my property. Nothing flashy, just a clean, neatly painted structure to store my tools and lawn equipment. After all, I'd gotten verbal confirmation from the HOA rep 2 months prior that sheds were fine as long as they didn't exceed 8 feet in height. Mine was just under 7.5. I was hammering in the last nail when I heard her voice. You could hear it from 3 yards away. Oh no, no, no! This isn't happening on my street, she shrieked. Karen. Every neighborhood has one, and ours came with all the classic features. A clipboard she carried like a weapon, binoculars by her kitchen window, and a firm belief that she was the law. She marched across her yard with the speed of someone heading into battle. What is this monstrosity? She demanded, arms crossed so tightly I thought her veins would burst. It's a shed, Karen, I replied, wiping sweat off my brow. For tools. Yard stuff. It's not allowed. It's an eyesore, and it's clearly over the HOA's height limit. It's within the limit, I said calmly. I got it approved. I even have the email. She scoffed. Don't get cute. We'll see what the sheriff says about that. I chuckled, assuming she was bluffing. She wasn't. The next afternoon, while I was working in the garage, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought something had happened to someone I knew. But when the officer stepped out and looked directly at the shed, I realized Karen actually called the sheriff over a shed. Afternoon, sir, the deputy said, polite but serious. We received a call about a potential zoning violation. You've got to be kidding me. I explained everything. I showed him the approval email, the measurements, even the receipt for the lumber. The deputy looked mildly annoyed, clearly realizing this wasn't exactly a case for the crime desk. I don't see any violation here, he said eventually. But you may want to double-check with your HOA, just to keep the peace. Oh, trust me, I muttered. I'll be checking everything. Later that evening, I told my brother what had happened. He's not just any lawyer, he's the state attorney. Calm, composed, and a big fan of justice in all forms. She called law enforcement over a backyard shed? He asked, eyebrows raised. Yep. Sheriff showed up and everything. He leaned back, thoughtful. People like her usually don't stop until they feel like they've won. Be careful. I nodded, not knowing just how right he'd be. A couple of days passed, and I thought that was the end of it. I even saw Karen across the street pruning her rose bushes and didn't get so much as a glance. But peace is always temporary with people like her. 3 nights later, I found a bright orange slip taped to my front door. An HOA violation notice. Bold, all caps, unauthorized structure in violation of Code 6.12. That's odd, I thought. I already got it cleared. I emailed the HOA president, a guy named Marvin, asking what was going on. No response. Then came the second violation. This one came with a $250 fine. By now, I wasn't just annoyed, I was livid. I went down to the HOA office in person. After waiting in the lobby for 20 minutes, I finally got to speak with Marvin. Hey, I said, trying to keep it civil. What's up with the violations? I got this approved by Susan 2 months ago. Marvin looked uncomfortable. Well, Karen brought the matter up at the last board meeting, and we had to revisit the guidelines. So you changed the rules after I built the shed? It's more of a clarification than a change, he replied, dodging eye contact. You're fining me based on a rule that didn't exist 2 weeks ago? I asked, incredulous. We're just trying to maintain a consistent neighborhood aesthetic. I left before I said something that would make things worse. But inside, I was boiling. The next day, I saw Karen standing by my mailbox, phone in hand, pretending to take a selfie, except the camera was angled toward my shed. She was collecting more evidence. That's when something clicked. This wasn't about a shed. This was about control. She didn't like that I'd made a decision without her approval. That I didn't ask for her permission. She couldn't stand the idea of someone doing something she didn't oversee. But she picked the wrong guy this time. I called my brother again that night. She's escalating. And now the HOA is backing her. There was a pause. I'm coming down next week, he said. If she wants to play legal games, let's give her a real opponent. For the first time in days, I smiled. The week after my brother said he was coming felt oddly calm. No new violation letters, no sheriff visits, not even a smug glare from Karen across the street. It was like the storm had passed, or so I thought. Then, on Friday morning, a white envelope arrived in the mail. It was thick. My stomach dropped the second I saw the return address: Law Offices of Harper and Row. Inside was a lawsuit. Karen was suing me. The claim? Construction of a permanent structure without appropriate zoning review, violating neighborhood standards and causing measurable devaluation of adjacent properties. I blinked. Read it again. And then actually laughed out loud. She was claiming that my 7.5-foot shed, hidden behind a line of hedges, was destroying property values. But the kicker? The suit included sworn statements from 2 other neighbors, one of them being her cousin, and the other a woman who owed Karen a favor after a nasty yard dispute last summer. These weren't just complaints now, this was legal warfare. I immediately called my brother, Eric. She's really doing it, I said, pacing my living room. She filed. She got her cousin to back her up. This is nuts. I told you, people like her escalate until they're stopped. But this was a mistake on her part, Eric said calmly. Because now it goes through the courts. And that's my territory. When Eric arrived 3 days later, he walked into my house like a man on a mission, black blazer, case folder in hand, and a smirk that told me Karen's fun was about to end. First of all, he said, flipping open the lawsuit packet, this is paper thin. She's citing HOA rules that were changed after your shed was approved. That's already a violation of contract law. She also claims I didn't get permission. You have the email, the timestamp, the HOA's acknowledgement. That's rock solid. I nodded, feeling slightly better. But here's where it gets interesting, he added. You said Karen's cousin is a local judge? Yeah. Eric smirked. Then it's time to expose some conflict of interest. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The day before, Karen made a big show of strutting through the neighborhood with her clipboard, announcing to a few gossip-hungry neighbors that justice would be served tomorrow. One neighbor even told me, she said, let's see him act smug when I've got legal documents proving he broke the law. It was clear she thought the courtroom was her victory lap. But Eric had done his homework. And the truth was about to hit her like a brick. Tuesday arrived, and the courtroom felt more like a showdown. Karen sat on the plaintiff's side with her arms crossed, her lawyer beside her. She wore a beige pantsuit and a permanent look of smugness. On my side, Eric leaned back in his chair, calm, professional, surgical. I sat beside him, trying to keep my heart from pounding out of my chest. The judge walked in. Not Karen's cousin, thankfully, that had already been flagged and recused. Instead, a judge from another district had been assigned. The proceedings began. Karen's lawyer argued her case passionately, painting me as a reckless neighbor who violated building codes and disrespected the community standards everyone else had to follow. Then Eric stood up. He opened with a simple, clear line. This case isn't about a shed. It's about personal vendettas masquerading as legal claims. He laid out the timeline, how I had received approval, how the rules were changed after the fact, how Karen had initiated contact with law enforcement without cause. He even pulled up the neighborhood zoning code and showed that my shed complied in every way. Then came the moment that flipped everything. Eric submitted a motion to include Karen's own HOA violations into the record. She stiffened. "You see," Eric said, voice steady, "my client's neighbor, Ms. Karen Daniels, currently has 3 active violations herself, including unpermitted concrete edging, non-HOA approved fencing, and most notably, a security camera that points directly into my client's backyard." There was a collective gasp from the courtroom. Karen's face turned red. She leaned over and whispered frantically to her attorney. Eric wasn't done. "And we have signed affidavits from multiple neighbors who state they were pressured by Ms. Daniels into supporting this lawsuit under threat of HOA retaliation." Karen's lawyer objected, but it was too late. The damage was done. After a short recess, the judge returned with a decision: case dismissed. With prejudice. Which meant she couldn't file again. But the judge didn't stop there. "I also recommend this HOA board conduct a full review of its internal conflict of interest procedures. It appears this case was rooted more in personal conflict than actual policy violation." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Outside the courthouse, I expected Eric to gloat. But he didn't. He just shrugged and said, "Justice is clean when you do it right." Still, the fire in Karen's eyes wasn't gone. She didn't yell or scream, but she didn't congratulate us either. Instead, she walked past me slowly, lips tight, and muttered, "This isn't over." I believed her. Because people like Karen don't stop, they reload. That night, I sat on the back porch with Eric, both of us sipping iced tea under the glow of string lights near the infamous shed. "She'll try something again, won't she?" I asked. "Probably," he said. "But you've got the truth, and the paperwork, on your side. Just stay sharp." I looked at the shed. It was just wood and nails. But somehow, it had become a symbol of something bigger. About standing your ground. About not letting control freaks run your life. About choosing the high road, and still being ready when things get messy. And this wasn't the end. 3 days after the judge dismissed the lawsuit, the neighborhood buzz had reached a boiling point. It felt like I couldn't so much as step onto my front porch without someone slowing their walk or peeking through a curtain. Some were clearly rooting for me. Others whispered, probably wondering if Karen would retaliate. The answer came quicker than expected. Late Wednesday night, I heard a loud metallic clang outside. I rushed out in my slippers, only to find my backyard gate bent out of shape and one side of the shed spray painted with red letters, "Violator." My heart raced. I scanned the yard. No one. But there were footprints on the dewy grass, and one of them matched the heel pattern I'd seen Karen wear almost daily. That was it. The line had been crossed. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was harassment. Vandalism. A criminal offense. I called the sheriff's department and filed a report. The officer who came out was the same one Karen had called weeks earlier about the shed. He shook his head when he saw the paint. "Looks like the tables have turned," he muttered. "I just want this to stop," I told him. "Well," he said, "pressing charges might help with that." The next morning, Eric was already drafting the complaint. "This goes beyond civil disputes," he said. "This is targeted harassment and property damage. You'll file the report, and I'll push it through the state's office. If she wants to play games, fine. We'll play by the law." Karen, of course, acted shocked when the sheriff returned, this time with a notice of investigation. She stood on her lawn, arms folded, throwing in snide remarks for the officer to be careful believing everything that man says. She tried to talk her way out of it. Claimed it must have been teenagers, or random vandals. But she didn't know that Eric had already requested nearby street camera footage. One of our neighbors had a security system with a clear view of her backyard, and in the grainy footage from the night of the spray painting, you could see her slipping out through her side gate with a can in hand. That footage? It was handed over to the sheriff the next day. Now the situation wasn't just about the shed or a civil suit. It had turned into a criminal case, and the HOA was suddenly very quiet. No calls. No fines. No Karen at board meetings. She was trying to lay low, but the damage was done, and the community had taken notice. Still, something was off. A week later, just as the case against Karen was moving forward, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Effective immediately, your property is being reviewed for multiple compliance violations, including improper storage structures, unsightly landscaping, and failure to comply with recent regulation changes. I laughed. Unsightly landscaping? My yard was immaculate. But then I saw the fine print, failure to comply with recent regulation changes. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't acting alone anymore. She'd rallied some members of the HOA board, maybe out of pity, maybe out of manipulation, and they were trying to bury me in red tape. Eric, of course, wasn't surprised. "This is textbook," he said. "She's losing control, so she's trying to poison the system from the inside." Eric suggested we attend the next HOA meeting in person, not to argue, but to present everything we had. The shed approval. The post-dated rule changes. The evidence of targeted harassment. And most importantly, the criminal investigation still underway. So we did. That night, the community hall was packed. Word had spread. People wanted to see what would happen. Karen sat in the front row stoic, trying hard to look unfazed. But her foot tapped the floor, betraying her nerves. Eric stood before the board and laid it all out in clean, logical steps. No yelling. No drama. Just the facts, stacked high and undeniable. When he was done, he handed the president a document titled, "Intent to file injunction against HOA for retaliatory action." Gasps echoed in the room. Then something surprising happened. One of the board members, Mr. Lewis, an older gentleman with a firm voice, cleared his throat. "I think it's time we admit this board was manipulated. Karen Daniels has used her personal vendettas to push legal action that never should have happened. I motion to remove her from any HOA leadership capacity moving forward." Another board member immediately seconded it. Karen stood up, outraged. "You can't do this! This is a witch hunt!" But the vote passed 4-1. Karen stormed out. That night, it felt like the air had shifted. Neighbors I barely spoke to before came by to shake my hand. One even brought cookies. The gossip had turned in my favor, but more than that, people respected that I didn't stoop to Karen's level. I didn't scream. I didn't vandalize. I stood my ground and let the facts do the work. But the story didn't end with Karen's removal. A week later, I received a letter, this time from Karen herself. It wasn't an apology. It was a single sentence. "You may have won this time, but don't think you're untouchable." I showed it to Eric, who smirked. "I'll file a protective notice with the court. If she sends anything else like that, she's in deeper trouble." So, what did I learn? That standing up for yourself doesn't mean shouting the loudest, it means being prepared. Staying calm. Knowing your rights. I felt helpless when the sheriff showed up the first time, but now? I feel empowered. And even though Karen's shed crusade failed, she taught me something valuable. When someone tries to bulldoze your life out of spite, build something stronger with the debris. Now every time I look at that shed, I don't just see lumber. I see resilience. Proof that even when the neighborhood villain rallies the troops, truth, and a good brother, can win the war.